When it comes to what your family eats and drinks, you know your choices matter. You're the expert because you know what fits your life. And getting it right starts with good information. That's why America's beverage companies are sharing more information about our ingredients at goodtoknowfacts.org. No spin, no judgments, just the facts straight from the experts for more than 140 beverage ingredients. Visit goodtoknowfacts.org.
Walk us through the premise of the book, what you learned about yourself even writing it.
It's a childhood memoir about the time in the early 70s I was sent to a very prestigious but very flawed boarding school for 7 to 13-year-old boys. It was really an appalling place. It was run by a really bad abuser, emotionally and sexually and physically. I was talking to somebody who was there, I'm 61, he's 5 years older than me, and he had the scars on his buttocks from the canings there for 40 years. It was customary not to really pay attention. You packed your son or daughter off to one of these places, and they were under the control of, it could be bad people.
So Charles, an amazing career as a historian, a journalist, and an amazing author. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to bring so many different amazing things to society that, you know, at the core of it is to help people get better and help people in their lives?
Well, thank you for framing the question so generously. I think, like most of your listeners, I just do my best and make a lot of mistakes along the way. But I come from an incredibly privileged aristocratic background, and I'm well aware of that, always have been. And I think one of the blessings in my life was my mother, who was a bit of an outsider. And my parents got divorced when I was 3 years old. So I had two very separate households to look at when I was growing up, both privileged. But my mother lived in a farmhouse on the west coast of Scotland and had a more down-to-earth life. And my father came from this extraordinarily privileged Spencer family, you know, been living in the house I'm talking to you from for 500 years and all of that. Classic English titled folk, I guess, as a lot of people listening to your podcast will have a view about. But my mother gave me a gift, and she said, you have to do things for yourself, for self-esteem. And that's been my mantra, really. She had a gift shop in the local town, and I used to work there as a store hand.
Rinse takes your laundry and hand delivers it to your door, expertly cleaned and folded. So you could take the time once spent folding and sorting and waiting to finally pursue a whole new version of you. Like Tea Time You. Or this Tea Time You. Or even this Tea Time You.
So did you hear about Dave?
Or even Tea Time You.
So update on Dave.
It's up to you. We'll take the laundry. Rinse. It's time to be great.
And then when I was with my father, you know, the house we live in, Althorpe's been open to the public. So I was a tour guide here making £3 or whatever that is, $4 an afternoon. But it taught me a work ethic, and I've always worked really hard. And I've written a few books, and I've written 9, I think, and they take on average 3 years each. So each one of them is almost like a college degree. And actually, to be brutally honest, I've treated them all like a college degree. The first year I've done very little, just sort of thought about the problem. The second I've done the research, and the third, the actual heavy lifting of writing. But I think the key, and I've tried to give this to my children, is, you're very, very lucky where you come from. You're never going to have to worry about a bill or whatever. That's very, very lucky. But you're not going to be happy unless you do something for yourself.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And let me ask you a quick question. So are you in the historic Althorpe house right now? Is that where you're at?
I am. I'm in this beautiful room, which used to be my grandmother's sitting room, it was called. And it's now where I work. I write here and I run the estate. We have an agricultural estate here with some residential properties and things. So I had meetings before I spoke to you today, because I'm a few hours ahead of you. And I can tell you that today's going to be a good day. I've had meetings with the CEO here.
So you're about to make a trade based on a friend's text. But which you do you listen to? Is it, we could buy a house in Tulum? Get optioning those options. We could lose everything. Or let's do a little research. Get your head in the trade and make the investment decision that's right for you. Learn more at finra.org/trade-smart.
Dealing with the estate, I've been looking at media projects, and actually, I mean, it's not secret, Shawn. I have been diagnosed with ADHD, and so this very eclectic life that I have really suits my rather jumbled up brain. You know, when I was a kid, my family called me Buzz. Because I was always buzzing around like a busy bee. And so I'm lucky that I have many components to my life, and they all hopefully complement each other.
That's actually very interesting. Well, first of all, I feel extremely honored that you're doing this interview in the Althorp House. I have, when you mentioned that, I got goosebumps. That's pretty cool. I'm like a part of history, but from afar, from across the pond. So that's pretty neat for me, selfishly. But, you mentioned something about the ADHD, and what surprises me, because I also too have that massive, I call it a gift now, right? Before it was always, my source of frustration or anger, because, when you get distracted, when you're doing something, somebody with high levels of ADHD, it can be very frustrating when we have to shift in the middle of a thought, because we don't know if we're going to get that back, right? The thing that really intrigues me is that with the ADHD, you're talking about a 3-year process to write.
When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
A book. That right there is a pretty cool concept for somebody who also shares that same, I guess, disorder, in a sense that, like, it's really hard to focus. How have you been able to stay locked in on something like that for such a long period of time?
Well, I think actually the secret is I don't lock in. So because I can't, and I know that now. I mean, I think I'm classic ADHD. I'm not sure I needed a doctor's note for this. And my partner, she's called Kat Jarman. She's a leading archaeologist, one of the world's Viking experts, and she's from Norway. And we work so differently. We actually work together sometimes, but she's this absolute textbook academic, silence, rigor, data. I can go next door to make a cup of coffee and then sort of come around 2 hours later thinking, I know what I was meant to be doing, and I'm sure you can relate to that.
I do.
But what I am terrified of, and I think I went to quite sort of uptight boarding schools. I'm terrified of being late. And we were very badly punished if we were late. And so I have, from a very early age, cobbled together a sort of a way of getting things done on time. And yes, that's meant I had a degree when I was at Oxford. I didn't know, I can tell my tutors now, because I think they're all passed, sadly. But I used to do very little attendance at lectures and all that. But the last 6 months of the course, I worked really hard. So when I have to, I can. Day to day, I've come to accept that I'll have not only will I be spinning plates, I'll forget that I'm spinning plates.
This is fascinating to me because you're describing me.
Yes.
I mean, good Lord. I mean, I obviously went to school out here, university out here and at Louisiana State. I played baseball there, played in College World Series, did this, it was a big #1 school in the nation for baseball. But the one thing that I found is I spent very little time in the lecture hall. And it didn't bode well for me. I was always in hot water with the coaches, but for me, I just couldn't sit there. I just couldn't sit there. Hey, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our Powered By sponsor. We're proud to announce a partnership between White Sands Treatment Centers and the Determined Society. With multiple locations across Florida, White Sands provides luxury, top-rated addiction treatment, from medical detox and inpatient care to outpatient support and long-term aftercare. Their resort-style campuses, expert clinicians, and holistic programs create real, lasting recovery. Together, we're committed to bringing hope, resources, and healing to those who need it most. White Sands Treatment Centers.
Because of the relationship my family's had with the community here, you know, I have to be, I'm delighted to support good causes or whatever. But when I get involved, I always say I'll do anything except the annual general meeting, because that's not going to happen. I'm never going to sit through that. Because I find my brain's, it's like a box of fireworks, and it's just not, I'm not going to contribute. But give me a project, you know, a fundraiser or something, I'm delighted. But sit through an hour and a half going through accounts, I'm out.
I'm with you on that. It's funny because you said you have a fear of being late. That to me terrifies me. I don't care if it's for, you know, a birthday party. Obviously I'll never be late for a show, barring any like, you know, fender benders or traffic. But like my team always says, hey, you got a show at, you know, 11. What time are you going to be here? I'll be there at 9:30. Like I don't know if it's the athletic background or if it's the ADHD, but I'm massively terrified to be late. And I also look at it as a form of disrespect, you know, and that could be the athletic background.
I totally agree with both those. I mean, I'm always very, very early for flights at airports. I haven't got a problem with that. I've always got something to catch up on on my computers. It doesn't bother me. And I do find this thing. Somebody told me punctuality is the courtesy of kings. And it's the ultimate disrespect to be late for people, I think, because their time matters. And it would be very arrogant to think otherwise. I get there are people who just cannot get a handle on time. And I feel sorry for them. A lot of them not trying to be rude. But it's very much, I am in agony if I'm late for something.
Do you get the anxiety build up when you're late? Just like, oh my gosh, I can't really believe. Yeah,
it starts as a flutter in the heart and then it grabs you in the middle of the chest. Yeah,
it does. It does. It makes me angry too. It's like, why are we late for this? Like this could be, if we just left 20 minutes earlier, we would be right there on time. So man, that's just crazy. You know, never met before. And it just continues to solidify that we're all alike. We all have so many commonalities, you know?
Actually, that's one of the reasons I've always been interested in writing. Actually, always been interested in history, because from what I've looked at, which is only the past few hundred years, I'm not looking at ancient history. Humans are the same. If you read a letter from somebody to somebody else in the 17th century, yes, the language is different in a highfalutin way, but the sentiments are the same. Whether it's a tragedy or a triumph or the mundane, people haven't changed very much. And for me, writing as a historian, I would never frame myself as an intellectual or an academic. I'm a storyteller. And the reason I like telling stories is because I want to relate to the people involved. And actually, one of the things, when I started, I left college and was lucky enough to join the Today Show at NBC. And they were all like, oh goodness, you're so English. And I said, no, I want to learn about Americans, you know. And so I used to read not all, because there's too many, but I used to read a lot of your newspapers at the time and try and absorb myself in the culture. Of course, American TV shows have always been huge over here. They're rerunning Cheers now, which I always loved, and Frasier, and your comedies are so fine. And, you know, just learning the way of Americans. And of course, here we are sitting with so much in common, but they say there's a lot of differences between Americans and British people. But ultimately, you know, you're talking about the common nature of man, and I find that very reassuring.
What do you find that the biggest differences are between Americans and the British?
Well, I think there are differences that others have noticed, which I find less extreme. So people say that the British are more we're more, I think, because our weather's so terrible, we have a sense of humor that's quite dark. And because you've got to get by, we wake up in the morning and the weather's like you have in Seattle, but every day.
Oh, goodness gracious.
As opposed to the rest of America. I've been lucky enough. I lived in, I spent a lot of time in Pacific Palisades, the tragic as it is now, but I spent a lot of time in Pacific Palisades for a few years. And I've known New York well. I've got a daughter in college there, etc. So I do know the States quite well. I've spent many, many, many days there, and probably adds up to years. I find the Americans tend to be more openly patriotic. That's the biggest difference I find. And I think that is not a criticism, it's an admiration. The British tend to not take too many things too seriously. And that's a good thing because it does make for a good sense of humor. But I think we miss out, this sort of, we just assume we're probably on the wrong side of the story as Brits, whether it's in a sports match or politics. And we're too ready to roll over and just say, oh, yeah, well, we always get it wrong. And I think that's probably from having been a very important country once and being a fairly minor one now. There was a British Empire, but it's quite a long time ago. And so I think we're used to being a nation that's well past its international sell-by date. There's lots that's great about Britain, and I'm proud of it. But I think we've come to terms with what we were and what we are now.
It's interesting because from my seat, I can speak for just me and the people in my immediate circle. We admire the fact that the British are more easygoing and, have more of a, excuse me, tempered demeanor in some ways. So where you think it's something like, hey, it's a pro and a con, where I'm like, wow, I wish I could be more like that.
Well, actually, I once had to really look at this subject, the difference between the British and the Americans, because when I was working in London for NBC, they said, oh, could you go and look? There's some minor movie being made and it's about the British and Americans, and maybe you could do a background piece or two about it. And it was A Fish Called Wanda, which nobody knew was going to be this huge Oscar-winning hit. And I remember talking to, this is not a name drop because I was there in a professional capacity and he's a lovely man, but I don't know him. I was chatting with Kevin Kline, who won an Oscar actually for that movie, about it. And he was saying, it's so weird with you Brits. You have these sentences and they go on and on and on and they make sense.
The classic run on that makes sense. That you get chastised in American school for.
That's right. No, over here, it seems to, I think also the British are terrified of being impolite. So best to keep talking rather than to leave an embarrassing gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the book, A Very Private School. I mean, that book has been instrumental, as you mentioned. Many people are contacting you, telling you how it's helped them in their lives. Walk us through that. The premise of the book and what you learned about yourself even writing it.
Yeah. So just to explain the book, it's a childhood memoir about the time in the early 70s. I was sent to a very prestigious but very flawed boarding school for 7 to 13-year-old boys. And I was packed off at the age of 8 there. Totally normal procedure for people from my background, has been for centuries. And it was really an appalling place. And it was run by a man. Your legal department doesn't need to worry. He's gone, but he was a bad abuser, emotionally and sexually and physically. Lots of beatings. I was talking to somebody who was there I'm 61. He's 5 years older than me. And he had the scars on his buttocks from the canings there for 40 years. So that gives you an idea, the whippings they were really, of little boys. These were not young men. We were children. And our parents were sadly, it was customary not to really pay attention. You packed your son or daughter off to one of these places and they were under the control of could be bad people. And the reason I call it a very private school, so yes, it's a private school, but these could thrive very well in days of minor sort of communications. We had one letter home a week, which we wrote under supervision. there was no access to a landline telephone. And of course, it was before cell phones were invented. So we were really captured in this terrible place. And what's been interesting to me is I wrote it and I thought, I never intended to write a book about this, but I just kept a file on my computer and I kept just filling it with random thoughts. It could be really mundane things like what we had to eat at lunchtime on a Friday, through to appalling abuse. And, you know, I was sexually abused there by a female member of staff when I was 11, and that's had huge ramifications on my life ever since. And essentially, it was a sort of hellish place, I think. And I've been in therapy on and off for 30 odd years. And I noticed it just kept coming back to that, way more than my parents' divorce or any other issue that had happened to me. And then I started to write this book. And when I talked to people, these were often men who I hadn't seen for 40, 50 years. They opened up to me with just appalling stories, you know. And then I remember learning, there was a master who used to beat me up badly, you know, blood and stuff. And I came across this guy and I said, oh, I remember your brother at the school. And he said, yeah, he died. And he died because of what they did to him at that school. It had got to him emotionally and he gave up wanting to live. And I realized actually, because I've written a few books before, that it was really my job to put this down. And what's happened, you know, it came out March last year, is that there is barely a day goes by without somebody coming up to me. A woman came up to me this morning and shook my hand and she said, I wanted to thank you. She said, it's a horrifying book, but fascinating. And then I've heard from, I'll call them boys because I knew them as boys, who have come to me out of nowhere. A guy wrote to me last month and I remember him, and he was bullied at the school. And he told me that he'd been a drug addict for the last 40 years, but had come out of it partly because of the book, but also his parents had died and he had blamed them for never paying attention. He had told them how bad it was. And so it was a personal book about a very bleak time in my life. But I didn't want it to be a pity tale. I wanted it to shine a light on something which I think is, well, I think my message, I know you like to know what people are thinking when they write this. My message is that always look after your kids. You know, my parents, the other parents thought, well, this is a fancy school. Everything's going to be fine here because, you know, it's got a reputation. But it was populated by deviants in the staff, and we had no one to tell. And interestingly, you know, if you talk, I have children, and children accept things as normal, which they shouldn't. We didn't tell our parents about it. We didn't know how to. We hadn't got those relationships, because once you're packed off away from school at a young age, there is a cord that's broken. And I said, actually, that the way we survived, the only way we could survive the brutality of that place was to let a small but important part of us die. And so I know that I will never be probably what I would have been if I hadn't gone to that school, but you just have to accept that and move on, actually.
You know, it's a cultural thing, right? Like I'm listening to, because you said it's a normal thing to pack the young boys and young girls off and send them to boarding school. It's something over there in the UK that happens very frequently and very seldomly here in the United States. And like, if you look at it, like I know someone that sent their kid to boarding school. I'm like, wow, like, how do you do that? Like, I don't know if I could, you know, not see my 3 babies for, you know, a whole school year or whatever the deal is. And you succumb, you submit to the control, right, of whoever is running that school and not knowing what's going on with your children. But I look at that as a cultural difference, right? It's so normal there. And I don't, you know, when you look back at, you know, your parents and things like that, they're just doing what they feel is normal and not really knowing what could possibly happen. But at the end of the day, you and so many children were impacted. That's just so interesting and also terrifying.
I agree. Do you know, I actually think it explains an enormous amount about the caricature, really, of the stiff upper lip Brit, you know, because if you're sent away at that age and you have to survive, Look, there are some schools that are good, and I would say a lot fewer parents send their children away now than when I was young. But
starting something new is straight up scary. I remember thinking, what if this fails? What if nobody listens? But taking that leap changed everything, and having Shopify on your side makes it a whole lot easier. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates to build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you with easy email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. Best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/TDS. Go to shopify.com/TDS. That's shopify.com/TDS.
I think you sort of cauterize these young children's emotions so that they can survive. And of course, you're going to reap the rewards from that. And I look at a lot of our politicians in the past in England who went to these schools, and it really did mess them up. I mean, even the greatest, such as Winston Churchill, he was very badly treated at his boarding school, and he had a family nanny who rescued him because he had terrible wounds on him from the masters and things when he was a little kid. But I do think it stems from what I looked at. It stems from something I touched on earlier, which is the British Empire. So if you have an empire and you want it to thrive, why not take the kids from what would be perceived as a ruling class and break them emotionally, and then you can use them overseas? You're not going to be homesick if you're running a colony in a colonial outfit in India or Canada or Australia if you were sent away from home at 8 and had those ties broken. And I think it's a function of the British Empire that they needed lawyers, judges, soldiers, governors to go out and hold the fort.
It's interesting because there's a fine line, right, of kids you want your children to be independent, right? Like I look at like my kids, like I think sometimes that me and my wife are too, I don't want to say helicopter, but like that's a big, thing in the States, helicopter parent, right? And it's like, we try not to be, but at the same time, you want to save them from, certain things, but you also want them to learn. But there's a certain bond, right, that's created, to your point, that is broken when you go away at 8 years old. But it was also culturally speaking, right? It was ingrained because that was just what had to be done.
Yes. And there were very severe cases. So I used to have a literary agent who looked after me, and his parents were serving in India, and he was packed off to boarding school age 3 from India and didn't see them till he was 18. And he hated them. He never forgave them. What is the point in having kids? So I agree with you. I'm more of a helicopter parent. I think somewhere in the middle, you do want to bring resilience to your kids, but you don't need to get them packed off to live with strangers to do that. And I would say, you could drop, a lot of the people I spoke to said that, yeah, they recognized all the downsides that I mentioned, but they could have been dropped anywhere in the world and they'd have survived because they had done it in the worst possible circumstances. And they talked about their kids and how, I'm afraid to say how pampered they can be. And, but I think I'd rather be pampered than abused. I think that's
1000%. How is that, I guess, growing up in that school, the system, propelled you to be as successful as you are in the things that you're doing, because you have to display some massive amounts of determination and resilience.
Well, thank you. I'm well aware, by the way, Shawn, in the range of people you've had on this show, I come very low down in the list of achievements. But
it's not true.
What I have done in my life, so the things I have done in my life, I would say I'm very stubborn. And I took a view. I couldn't really, if you had asked me what was wrong with that school, I could have put it in childish terms when I was there, so-and-so scary, or I'm terrified. It would have been very basic. But I took a view very early on that this was a very, very dangerous environment. And I was very outgoing and bubbly and all of that. But I closed down and just looked. And it's very interesting because the headmaster, who was the ringleader of all the appalling abuse, I looked, my parents had kept the termly reports he used to write about each kid. And he said several times in the 15 reports that he did for my 5 years there, Charles is watching us very closely. And I like to think I was. And I like to think I've been blessed, along with ADHD, with a wonderful memory. And I was noting stuff down, and I was very resilient, luckily for me. But it did lead to real problems. I mentioned this master who used to rough me up badly. And he was in the wrong school. I don't know what he was doing. It was an incredibly privileged school, only 75 students there. And for England, most of them had household names from banking or business or aristocratic dynasties. And I don't know if he was punishing himself by going to this place full of privilege, but he was a self-professed Marxist. And he really didn't like me. But I was determined not to give in. I could never win, but I never gave in. And he hated it. And that's why he used to hit me. He had this very nasty trick. He had this big signet ring on his hand. And being hit by the masters across the head was quite normal then. But he used to do it and roll his hand at the last second and catch me with the metal of his ring and cut my scalp. And, I knew what was coming, but I never, ever, ever gave in. And maybe that resilience that came from those circumstances has helped me a bit.
It's, I as I'm listening and diving into those scenarios, it's every child or every human being has a point in their childhood that shapes them to a point where they will function as adults, right? And as horrific as those moments were, it's really prepared you to stay steadfast in your journey and to create the things that you're creating. Because without that, maybe you do lay off the gas. Maybe you don't do what you're doing now, right? You've been through a lot of adversity.
I feel
and that's
very
part
lucky.
Of it.
There are. Sorry, I feel very lucky because there are a lot of examples over here of people who come from my background where the child does nothing, and that doesn't go well. It's going to be drugs or too much alcohol or whatever. And yes, I've had there's lots of things I regret in my life, but I think having a focus or several focuses, as you and I understand with ADHD, but having things to concentrate on and try and do well is the key to life, I think. And that's something I've tried to impart to my kids too. I don't care. Actually, I do remember my very first day at the senior school I went to was Eton College, which is, one of the most historic ones over here. And there have been dozens of prime ministers come out of there. But I remember the headmaster, our first day, he was tough, but not nasty. And he said, there's a lot of you I'm not going to see till your final day in 5 years' time, probably, because it's such a big school. But he said, the thing that breaks my heart most is when you bring the printed out list of things you've done and it's short. He said, I want to see a long list. And he said, I don't care. You can be the best in the school at collecting butterflies. It doesn't matter. I want you to be the best at something. And that's a very good lesson for a 13-year-old.
I think so too. It just brings like you the word focus, right? Being in that environment gives you the ability, I guess as a consequence to be very focused on some things. And I think when we look back at our life or look back at a certain point in our life, we want to have a list of things that we've accomplished, that we've become great at, and most importantly, how we've helped people.
Yes. There's several, I've been on a course actually in the United States of a sort of intensive psychotherapy. and it was in California. And one of the scenarios we had to do as part of the course was they took us to a churchyard and had us lie down on a grave. And then the others filed past, and we had to think about what would we want the people we love to think about us once we were dead. And that sounds very macabre and weird, but actually it's about legacy, isn't it? It's about what you leave behind. And even as I mentioned, my partner is a Viking expert. Legacy was really what they were thinking about, to be remembered if you were a man, to be remembered as a great warrior or a great leader or whatever. And so what do we want to be remembered as? My father died a third of a century ago, in terms of the whole of time. But every thought I have of him is of a kind and decent man. And that's a very good example to have. And when I meet people around here, we've lived in this part of England for a long time, 70 miles north of London, and people knew him. But it's so lovely for me when my memory of him coincides with people who just met him because he was doing something in the community or whatever, they met him. And I think it's one thing to have your own idea of as to what your legacy would be, but to hear other people talk about it with respect, that goes a long way, I think.
I love that. We call that here the obituary exercise. What?
Yes.
What would your obituary say? And I think at some time, at some point in America, we go, oh my God, that's super morbid. Like, why are you going there? But I think it's also a good gauge because you objectively say, hey, this is where I'm at. Am I accomplishing what I want to accomplish? And am I leaving the L word behind? And as you were speaking, and then you said it out loud, you're speaking the same word I'm thinking, legacy. It's all about that, right? Mm. So I don't think that exercise is morbid. We want to know what impact we're leaving in this world. And I do know, and I truly believe that we are all put here to make an impact on society and on people. So, you got to evaluate how you're doing that, if you're doing an effective job at it or not.
I think so. And I think, the older I get, so I'm 61, so I've lost a lot of, friends and family over the years, as is going to happen to someone of my age. You become much more realistic about death. So it's not, and of course, it's not something I want to rush towards, but it could happen today. It could happen in 30 years, but it's going to happen. And you become much more accepting. I remember as a child hearing about, my grandparents dying, and it was like it was the end of the world, and that's natural. And so it's the same as our own age. When I was your age and I thought of someone at 61, I thought, my goodness, well, I better help them across the road almost, But now I'm there, I'm thinking, actually,
Actually, I can walk all the street myself.
But we are the victims of a very, very, all humans, I think, are the victims of a very tight, self-absorbed perspective. And so if we can step outside of that and think of our legacy and realize that we're just flying through this life, it really is at breakneck speed, then I think you're right. Let's think about the things we haven't done. I've taken up, I'm learning Italian now. I'm not really sure why, but I just wanted a new challenge, and I like going to Italy. But I'm luckily, we speak a language, you and I, which goes a long way around the world. But I just thought, well, why not? And I gave up alcohol. I don't believe I had a problem with it, but I just thought, well, I don't need it. And there's lots of things I've done recently where I just thought, no, I just don't want to just trundle along as I have done, because I want to keep improving.
I gave up alcohol too. I never had a problem with it, but there's certain points in my life where I probably drank too much of it, but it doesn't impact my life in a positive manner. So if it doesn't help me move along and help people, then I'm out. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, and I envy you. So I toyed with it for ages, giving it up, and I'd sort of go, oh, I'm going to give it up for 100 days. And I found that really not a problem, But then when I go back on, I thought, well, why did I bother? It's not that great. And I also think, I mean, I can't speak for you, but with ADHD, we're quite impulsive people anyway. And do we really need alcohol to make us more impulsive? I'm not sure we do.
I've never connected the two, but yeah, 2 + 2 does equal 4 there. My wife always says, like, you're super impulsive. You're super impulsive. I'm like, no, I'm just a visionary. I'm a dreamer, and I'm going to take action. But yeah, man, that is part of it, being impulsive. And to your point, begs the question, do we really need alcohol if we're already impulsive?
Well, I didn't. And it's been really, it's such a, look, all of the annoyingly true things are true, such as better sleep and all that sort of thing. But just, actually, I tell you what I try and do now, because I've got that awful thing going where I'm sort of so proud of having turned that corner that I look at other people. So I used to play cards once a month with old friends, and for years, decades. And it was a treat. But I suddenly realized, actually, are we here for the cards or the alcohol? And then the answer became clearer and clearer. And then when I stopped drinking, I love these guys, but I had watched them and it wasn't pretty. And I was thinking, gosh, I used to be like this, and I don't need it.
You start to see, like, when you remove a certain aspect of yourself that you're doing along with a group and you cease to do it and they continue, you can see things for what they are. And you'll be surprised on how far out of alignment that you become with these people.
I agree. And you do lose a few friends when you give up drinking, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's a pity, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's sad to lose friends like that because I have, but at the end of the day, okay, if I'm going to lose that friendship, are they friends or are they drinking buddies?
It's true. And do it's obviously there's an element of addiction even in social drinking, or a little bit more than that. And there's there are not many good addictions, are there really? Maybe exercise is a good one.
Maybe, but even that can kill you if you do it too much.
Yeah, that's true. You do see people in the gym who are clearly on the wrong side of healthy, but from overdoing it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. As we land the plane, I want to ask you, aren't you doing a podcast? You're doing a podcast now.
Oh yeah, I was doing one, and it was such fun. By the way, aren't they great? They're so fun, and meeting people. But I was doing it. That's how I met my partner, actually, Kat, the professor. And I was doing it with a guy who's not a household name in the States, but he's a very unusual guy because he was a pop star and then a priest. And now he's been on everything from our equivalent of Dancing with the Stars to everything. He's a super guy and he's a friend of mine. So we had really good fun doing it. But we set ourselves ridiculous podcasts. So each of the three of us had to become a world expert in a new subject within a week. And we're all busy people. And so we did it for 2 years. And then we thought, we just can't do it anymore. And I miss it. We'll do something else, but maybe once a month or something. But people listen to podcasts. And of course, they're a lot of work, aren't they? You had to prepare properly. And again, I think you're the same as me. It's a courtesy to your listener that you want to give them something that's thought through a bit.
Well, it's such a delicate dance too, Charles, right? Because you want to make sure that the guest is happy and comfortable. You want to make sure that you hit the points that they want to cover and not for your own selfish reasons. It is an art. A conversation is an art form. And I take great pride in having a conversational approach because that's what the audience seems to really be gravitating towards and really taking in and valuing, because there's too many shows out there. And this, there's too many shows out there that are just trying to say something to get, views or listens or to go viral or to cause a stir. That's really not what we do here. And for those reasons that we don't do that here, yes, it takes an extreme amount of preparation on my side because my responsibility to my guest and to my listeners is to craft an amazing conversation that brings massive amounts of value
Yes. And I can feel that. And that's actually why I said yes. I mean, to be honest, I'm not often a guest on podcasts because of the problems you flagged up there. But I could see what you're doing is really meaningful, and the intention and the process are spot on. So I've been delighted to be your guest today. And for those listening, I would say you haven't looked at a single note, which is very lovely. And we've been able to just have a normal chat.
Yeah, I just, it's funny because I believe in having an outline in my mind, right? And I believe in, maybe, okay, the conversation can go, behind door number 1, 2, or 3. And it's not up to me to judge it. It's up to me to craft the authentic conversation. And that's why, to your point, and I appreciate you noticing, I'm not looking down at a note card. So here's my hands, audience. There's no note cards. There's no nothing. There's a cup of coffee down here and an amazing conversation between two men. That's it. Right. And I feel as though those open dialogues I think is going to be the conversations here in the near future that produce the best impact for society. That's just my hope, I guess.
No, I agree. I think that's really honorable and true. So it's good.
Yeah. So as we start coming down to the tail end of the interview, I want to ask you, what's next, man?
Well, right now, I actually, to be honest, I've gone through a lot of stuff recently, and I've put things on hold. And at the moment, I'm sort of sifting through. I'm going to be making a documentary on the boarding school situation.
Ooh,
and
nice.
I'm looking forward to doing that. I think it needs to be done. And then I've got, I'm going to be writing again, because that's sort of what I do. But I don't know yet what the subject is. I've got millions of ideas, and I don't know, what happens with me is I have ideas for a book, and I think, oh yeah, that's the one. This is probably ADHD. And then after about 2 days, I think, well, what was that going to be about? And you need to have that process go on. If it stays with me as a really good idea for a week or two, then I will embark on it, because it has to hold you. If it doesn't hold you, it's not going to hold the reader, is it? So there's that.
Yeah, because if it doesn't hold you, you can't intelligently write on it or speak on it or be invested in it, right? And it's funny because again, I'm hearing things you say is like, we are so identical in so many areas. If it doesn't hold me for a week, then I'm out on the idea. Because we have to do that, you and I. Because if we are impulsive in our career, that could be really bad. That could be really bad.
It could be really bad and wasting everyone's time. And as you and I are both, we're both busy, and we both, I'm, as I keep saying, ahead of you in terms of years, but you find actually, as you get older, you think, no, I haven't got time for that. I want to do this. And I talked to a guy who I know locally who runs homes for seniors. And I said to him, so what age do I want to die? And he said, you want to, and I hope I'm not going to offend older listeners, but he said, to be honest, things go very wrong after 85 in most cases. But he said to me, do everything you really, really want to do by 75, because the wheels can come off very fast. So, that's a scale I'm looking at, and I just want to keep going, and not just for the sake of going, but I want to keep going in a meaningful way. That's my objective.
Purpose is massive. And, I'm sitting here at 46, turning 47 this October. And I'm like, man, I got a lot of time, but do I? Right? We never know. And that's what's scary as a parent and a husband is, staying healthy and making sure that you're around. And plus, selfishly, I want to see my kids grow up. I want to see my grandchildren. I want to live this life. I feel that there's a lot for me to do. So I just really appreciate you. And I'm excited to see the documentary. I'm going to have to keep in touch with Tris and make sure that I know when that thing's coming out, because I want to support it for sure. We can always hop back on too when that comes out, if you'd like, and we can talk about it and promote it.
I'd love that, Shawn. That would be really nice.
That'd be much fun.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe I'll get out over across the pond and, come take a tour.
Well, let me know. You must come up here. It's a part of England that hasn't changed much for several hundred years. So I'd love to show you it.
I would love to see it. One last question. So the show is called The Determined Society, right? Because we're going through our own stories throughout our life, right? Whether they're stories that are made up in our own minds or actual truth, but we all have to have this type of determination that leads us to our next thing and gets us through those tough moments. So in your definition, how do you define true determination?
I think true determination needs, you have to be sure that you've identified what matters first, and then just hold on to it for dear life, because don't be buffeted by things going on around you, people around you. Once you've established what's really of core importance to you and hopefully the world in a minor way, stick with it. So that's the determination. It has to, there's no point in being determined about something that doesn't matter.
Very well said, sir. Very well said. Well, I appreciate you so much. For the audience that is watching and listening, go scoop up the book, A Very Private School. If you are headed to London, a little north of London over the summer, the Althorp House is available for touring. So check it out. And again, Charles, thank you so much for coming on. I had an incredible time with you, and looking forward to seeing more from you and doing more with you.
Thank you, Shawn. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And for the audience, share this episode with someone you know, love, and trust that will get a lot of value out of it. And until next time, stay determined.
Next up is a little song from CarMax about selling a car your way.
You want to sell those wheels, you want to get a CarMax instant offer.
So fast.
Want to take a sec to think about it.
Or like a month.
Want to keep tabs on that instant offer.
With Offer Watch.
Want to have CarMax pick it up from your driveway.
So, want to drive? CarMax. Pickup not available everywhere. Restrictions and fee may apply.